Hi, hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Randy and I love to crochet. And today there will be no tutorial. Today it will just be talking about fluffy yarn. I love fluffy yarn. If you are subscribed to my channel or follow my Instagram, which if you're not, you definitely should be. But if you do either of those, you see that almost every plush I make, I use fluffy yarn. And to be completely honest, it's my preferred way to. I really feel like fluffy yarn has kind of gotten a bad rap where people say it's very difficult to use, it's very difficult to work with. And today I kind of want to try and maybe not necessarily encourage people because I don't think it's for everyone, but kind of try and give it a little bit of a better representation because I don't think fluffy yarn deserves the negativity around it of how it's a difficult and hard to use yarn. I've used way more difficult yarn than this. Now, I'm not going to talk too much. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to break this down in several different ways, but throughout the time, I will try my best to walk you through all the different types of fluffy yarn I've personally used and showing the differences and everything. So let's get started. All right, to start, I have 6 types of fluffy yarn. I actually have not used this one yet, and I'm gonna consider this fluffy yarn. I'm sure not everyone does. It is Feels Like Bliss Lion brand, but we will get to that in a minute. I'm just prefacing that I'm gonna count this. Now, the first one I have here is actually from the Dollar Tree. This is the Premier Yarn from there. I don't think it has like a specific name. I think it is just fluffy yarn from there. But here's kind of like a close-up of it. And then we'll do a close-up of the next yarn, which is also Premier Yarn, but this one is Little Bunny. So the cost of a skein of this one is $1.25. I believe the skein, I honestly don't fully remember, so I'm not gonna say how big it was, but I think it was about between 60 and 80. A skein of Little Bunny, I believe, is 109 yards. It's $3.99, and here is a good look at the yarn. The next one is Hobby Yarn. I believe this one is Peacock. I ordered it a while ago, but here is what it looks like. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of it left. The next one, or the next two, I should say, are both from Amazon. All of these yarns will be linked down below. I will be completely honest, I don't know how to say this, but this is the Amazon one. This one I think was like $6.99 to $8.99 a skein. This one was $9.99 for 2 skeins. This is a different Amazon one. This was, I think, 3 skeins for $21.99. And lastly is Feels Like Bliss, which I think is $7.99 a skein. And you get 109 yards, but you can see it's very different from all the rest. So we've gotten a look at all the yarns, and now I'm going to just give a general talk over all of them. And then I'll actually show what it looks like slightly crocheted. So to start, these are both Premier. This one's Dollar Tree. This is actually Little Bunny from them. And I'll go ahead and give a spoiler. Little Bunny Premier Yarns is my favorite fluffy yarn. I love how it looks the best. I think it's the easiest to work with, but I think of all the yarns, if you are going to start with a fluffy yarn, this should be your starting point. This I like because you can tell it has like a little bit more layer to it. This is kind of just like one thin layer compared to this where it looks on one side it has 2 and it's a little longer. This, as we'll go to see in a second, is relatively easy to see your stitches because it's nice and thin. So if you're just looking for a starter yarn, fluffy yarn, and you want to run away after hearing it, I recommend the Dollar Tree yarn. I don't use it a lot because my personal Dollar Tree only has this light gray color and then a pretty burgundy, and while they're both nice, I just don't know what projects to do with that. As I've already said, this Premier yarn is my favorite because it's thick enough but also very easy to work with. Funny enough, this one from Hobby Yarn was my first fluffy yarn I ever used. The length of it which is very similar to this Amazon one. I believe this Amazon one was trying to replicate this hobby yarn. These are definitely a little bit harder to work with, as well as this fake fur one from Amazon. The longer the fur, the harder it will be to see the stitches. This one definitely has the longest, but I think if you're trying to get like a longer one, hobby is the way to go, because you can see the difference in the shine. Maybe not so well, my lighting's not great right now, but the Amazon one's very shiny, and this one kind of has a very natural look to it. This one is a like true fake fur yarn. It's like super soft, balled up in the skein. It has more of like a, not really like a string, but more of like, it's not a fabric. I don't know what you would call this as the centerpiece. And then last, like I already said, I have not used this yet, so we'll be trying it out together, but this definitely is a completely different look altogether. I just wanted to include this because I feel like this is going to be the most accessible for everybody, because this is at Michael's. I know not every Dollar Tree carries yarn, so I felt like this might be the most accessible. So we've gotten a good overview. I've talked a little bit about it. Let's look at what they look like used. We're going to start with the Dollar Tree yarn, and I generally use a hook that is smaller than recommended. So I think this one is the only odd one out that recommends a small hook size. Every other skein I have used generally recommends a relatively large hook size, like perfect example. This one recommends a 9mm hook size, so I'd probably use a 7 or a 6. Like I said, this was an outlier, but for the most part, I go down like 2 to 3 full sizes. So if it recommends an 8, I'll do like a 5 or a 6. If it recommends a 7, I'll use like a 5. But with that being said, we're just going to do a magic ring here. And as I put my stitches into here, I just want to show you how it kind of looks when we work through it. And then I'm going to do a few rounds. I'm not counting, like I'm not going to get too specific, just to show you whether or not you can see your stitches and whether or not this feels like something you can work with. But this is kind of what it looks like as we're working it out. Still going to mark my starting stitch, but as you can see, we're going to go into the first one. And a big part of crocheting with fluffy yarn is feeling, especially when you use a smaller hook size. You have a lot more tension, so you really can't really force it to go into a spot that it won't be willing to go into. But a lot of times I will feel physically, like right here, I can feel there's a opening for a stitch, and that's where I'll go in. Now for this one, you already can kind of see it very faintly, but there are physical stitches being formed. And that's what, the longer you work on a project with fluffy yarn, the more you'll see the stitches. I personally don't even look for the stitches anymore because I just go 100% on feeling / like the availability of my hook to go in. So I'm going to do a couple rounds here and show you that you can see the stitches starting to form. So unfortunately with this color and the lighting, it's a little hard to see, but the further along you go, you will start to see your stitches. So fluffy yarn isn't something where your stitches are completely invisible the entire time you use them. They are like able to see. Let's see if the pink is a little easier, so now we'll switch to Little Bunny. Oh, let me also show you this. This is kind of how it looks. I am going to show you finished products of all of these except for this one because I made a pumpkin out of this and I packed it away with my Halloween decorations. But you can kind of see like the height of it. You do get 2 different looks on the inside and the outside, so there is that as well. But now I'm going to do my version of the magic ring where you do 4 stitches which, speaking of that, I think the biggest downside of using fluffy yarn is I find it a little difficult to do like just flat rows. Sometimes the stitches get lost, but even right here, we can see the stitches. And then we'll make our magic ring. And we'll start to insert into the center. I don't think I went all the way over, but that's okay, because I'm not actually making anything with this. But I will do some stitches and then, all right, and trying to get like a better glimpse in, like here, we don't have a stitch, so no matter how hard I try and push through, I can't get through, but I have a stitch here, and it just easily glides through. Even with a tighter tension with fluffy yarn, there should never be like too much of a fight, and there's probably not a stitch there for you to use. So once again, like there's no stitch there, I can't get my hook through, but there's a stitch here, so it nicely glides through it. Or if there's too much of a battle with it, you may be using just way too small of a hook. Now with this one, I think generally takes several rounds to get to it, but once again, if we really look in there, you can see stitches. And here's how this looks. It's very, very similar to this, but I will say they feel completely different. They are the most similar because they are produced by the same company, but this one, kind of like I was talking about with the orange one from Amazon, has kind of like that silky shine to it. And this feels a little bit more true to like a plush, in my opinion. So there is the Premier Little Bunny yarn. Now I will do hobby yarn, which like I said, I don't have a lot of this, so unfortunately I cannot do a ton. These stitches I think are easier to see, but it's not as easy to work with the longer hair in a lot of ways because your yarn does get tangled. So we're gonna do a magic ring. Like you can see your stitches pretty clear right there. And then this is kind of harder to go into the center. I didn't pull any yarn through. And then we're gonna pull our yarn through, but let's see, before run out. You can much more clearly see the stitches, but I find that sometimes with the longer pile hair, it does get tangled, and it does tangle up on your hook, so it can get lost on you while you're crocheting. But you can see how it kind of looks in a small swatch. Like I said, I'll show you full sizes of almost everything, and it's a very drastically different look from this one. Next, we'll use the one that's similar to that from Amazon. Like I said, I'll link all these so you can definitely like price point stuff other than the Dollar Tree, because I do not believe Dollar Tree is available online. I could be wrong. But compared to the hobby yarn, like I said, I definitely like the hobby yarn better for a longer one. This one, I did lose my stitches a little bit more. I think hobby yarn definitely designed a yarn that you can see the stitches a little better. But more than anything, I'll probably say it a couple more times, feeling for your yarn is going to be the biggest. Feeling for your stitches, feeling for the yarn. The fluffy yarn is just a matter of doing. The more you use it, like this to me is so much easier to use than like chenille yarn or velvet yarn. But as you can see, there are the stitches here, but you do have to dig for them a little bit. And then I find this yarn also a little bit harder to like feel and then get your hook in here. I think this one I had to use like a 6 or a 7, so that's why I'm struggling a little bit now. But there are stitches, and this is what it looks like. It is very similar to the hobby yarn in the length and look, but definitely shinier. Next, we'll do the fake fur yarn, which gives a completely different look than the rest of them. Generally, I find this to be a little more expensive. This one was really affordable though. And this was my most difficult one to work with. I once again think I used a 6mm hook with this, so I might fight with it a little bit. Actually, I have my 6mm. Let me grab that. Make it easier on me. So I will do, because as you can see, the fur kind of goes with you and tangles into it. This one, you might not really be able to see much at all at first. But we will get through that if I can. So here you can see our stitches, and this is what it looks like. It is long and fluffy, but this definitely has its challenges by just the thickness of the fur in general, and then trying to find your stitches by feeling. I know I have a stitch here, but it doesn't like that. There we go. You can still find them by feeling. You can definitely see them if you look for them. It'll just take a little more time, and you have to deal with the fluffy part tangling into the yarn. But that's what that looks like. And like I said, I have not used this Feels Like Bliss yet, but we'll do a little sample. I think this will also be very friendly to everybody of what we can do. Even though it looks like it's a little hard to see the stitches, but this has like a nice stretch to it. I'm also going to use my 6mm. Go into here. Actually, I could see why some people do not like it. You can see your stitches, but it's definitely not the same as like acrylic or cotton yarn or even wool yarn, chenille yarn, how the stitches are very present. You still have to look and see. And this gives a very different look than all the rest. It has like a very short, almost, I don't want to say flocked, but almost like if you prick wool, you get that. So now I'm going to go through all of the projects and talk about some tips and tricks with it. Like I said, I don't have my project with my Dollar Tree yarn, but this is Little Bunny Premier Yarns, which is relatively similar. The feeling is slightly different, and I'm going to talk about, clearly he doesn't only have that yarn, but I'm going to talk about how this feels and everything. But here is kind of like a super close-up of the yarn all done. You can still see your rows and stuff with this, so it's still very much so crocheted, but he almost has I don't want to say a spongy texture because that's definitely not right, but they have a very special texture to it, and this is just of all of them, I love this feeling. It doesn't have that shiny silky feeling to it at all. But with that being said, one of the tricks I've seen a lot, but I personally did not use, is if you're struggling to find your stitches, use stitch markers. Use your stitch markers to mark out your spots. You can use it for every single stitch if you need to, at least until you get to the point where, like I said, almost every project I've done has gotten to a point where I can clearly see my stitches. But that is a tip, and I will once again kind of show you guys how this looks fully done in a piece. This is Little Bunny Premier Yarns. All right, so this is the hobby yarn Peacock. You can see it looks very different. This was my first fluffy yarn project. I really want to go back and either redo him. I have a tutorial. It's a potato pillow. Or just give him a little update. He has a little smile in here hiding, which is a downside of the longer fluffy yarn. You'll see it in the other projects I'm going to show you as well. But when you use acrylic yarn to add detailing, he looks like he's going to bite me with that mouth. He actually is smiling, I swear. Here it is. That is a downside of the longer fur. You lose your acrylic yarn, you lose your details, you lose like a lot of times like this with your smile. I will show you what I did on my next project to help prevent that. But this is kind of what it looks like. This is a downside of the longer fluffy. As you saw in Baymax, for the shorter, you can definitely see like his mouth, and that makes it a little easier. But when you use this longer fluffy, and you also will get, which I don't know if you can see, these pulls. So that's just like with love and wear, that tends to happen. But yes, so that's that. And my biggest tip with fluffy yarn is to just try it out. Find some, try it out, see if you like it. If you don't like it, my feelings won't be hurt. The project you were gonna do with it, its feelings won't be hurt. But I think it's worth trying, and I don't think you'll know if you can use it or not until you try. The next one, which needs a little bit of like maintenance on him, is used with the Amazon like fluffy yarn. This is Garfield, which all of these things I do have tutorials of if you really like any of them. But I have to fix this. This is my son, so he has been like well loved. But this is like a good way to put details on your piece so the mouth doesn't disappear. Is I crocheted a acrylic piece separately. That way I could do a nose and a mouth detailing so they don't get lost like his eyes here. You can also trim the fur around their eyes to make it more obvious, or you can do what I did on his back and on his ears here, where I just use fluffy yarn as the detailing, or like on Baymax where I use chenille yarn where it's thicker and more noticeable. Personally, for eyes and like simple mouths, I like to use acrylic because it's thinner and looks a little smoother. But this is kind of what the finished product looked like, similarly to this guy, which you can kind of see the rows and like that he's a little more crocheted. He just looks almost textured. I feel like if you're looking for something that doesn't look crocheted at all, this is your best bet. He does not look crocheted, in my opinion. Well, not fully. He looks like something that might surprise people that he's crocheted a little bit, where he's matted down some, but like if you look at his legs, they just look fluffy. And last project to show is the blue like faux fur from Amazon. Once again, he doesn't necessarily look crocheted. He almost looks like he's has curly fur, and that's just like the way the crochet texture shows up. You can see it here. He also needs a little TLC. Some of his tails have come out. But once again, it's hard to see his eyes with this. It's hard to see his nose with this. I actually used the gray version of the orange Amazon yarn to make a bigger Totoro, and you can't even tell he has whiskers because it's longer and harder to see. This I did sew on, or like I embroidered on. If I would have sewed his nose on, I think it would pop a little more. But even safety eyes can get lost in the fur, so that's like a big downside, as I've been saying. But yeah, I think overall they're all great, they're all different, they're all unique, and they all can portray very different things. Now let's go and kind of recap and talk about them all. So I've talked a lot about a lot of different types of yarn, and I didn't go too in depth with tips because I feel like I don't particularly know what people are really needing help with beyond just seeing your stitches, which I hope I did a somewhat of a job showing you guys different techniques that I personally use with that. But yeah, I hope this encourages people who have been debating using fluffy yarn to either find a yarn that they're excited to try out, as well as like is maybe more encouraged to get it. I will link all the different yarns I talked about in this video down below. And if you have any specific questions and want me to do a part 2 of me answering questions about fluffy yarn, please leave your questions down below. And if you want an immediate answer, like say, hey, can you answer me now? Or like, hey, I would like to know this in a part 2, because I'll be more than happy to do that as well. But yes, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Bye!